explain without digging deeper into the menus.
One day I considered to myself the question, is Dark Souls fair? I had watched YouTube videos and reviews for years, along with having lots of real and online discussions around the game, which eventually culminated in this question hitting me. At some point, the community had coined a catchphrase for the game, hard but fair. I don't know where this line originated from, but people tend to parrot it often, feeling the game hits the standard of fairness right on the head. Although there are a few caveats thrown out, and they tend to be the Capra Demon boss fight, Bed of Chaos, and sometimes a few other oddities, such as the character sword swings bouncing off walls, or the fall into Nita's boss arena. I thought the Bed of Chaos was a horrid fight, but the sword swings and Capra Demon never bothered me much. Adding to the discussion online, a little channel known as Joseph Anderson popped up and the YouTube algorithm dropped a bunch of his videos into my recommended list. I was initially mesmerized by what he said about Dark Souls. He presented how flawed the game was, with unfair design in many strange areas that were hampering the experience of mostly pure fair design. I agreed with him a lot, and I thought he had well-constructed points about the Hellkite Drake's surprise death, the elevator in Sen's Fortress, and Orlando Archers, and many other topics. Over time, I became more independent in my thinking about these topics, and I realized people on YouTube don't possess some magical understanding by which they understand games more than myself. As I discovered how I felt over time, I thought Sen's Fortress elevator was fair. I never once got hit by the top spikes as I looked up and saw them and was tipped off by the huge bloodstain on the elevator. How could it be unfair if I didn't get hit? Isn't that fair if I looked at my environment and got rewarded for paying attention? Over time, I considered something like, what does fairness even mean in the context of this game? Who or what determines a fair game? A final straw broke the camel's back, and I began to play a game called Tekken 7. I played it for a few years and learned about a whole world of fighting game history, language, and movement tech, such as wave dashes and backdashes. I learned a whole new system was being used to evaluate fairness in the Tekken community, and the rules for what was accepted were very different from Dark Souls. This cross-pollination in my thinking somehow brought me back to Dark Souls, and I began to consider that pivotal question: is Dark Souls fair? I think I have stumbled upon a more nuanced way to think about Dark Souls and its fairness. This string of events opened a whole world of artistic expression that was lacking from my narrowed prior understanding of Dark Souls that came from the online circle jerk. I confined my thinking to Dark Souls' specific mechanics and uses of them as the be-all and end-all for fairness. This would include things such as having the ability to roll out of damage. Prior, I thought, of course, having a dedicated button to prevent damage with iframes makes it more fair than COD's undodgeable bullets. Now my outlook is quite different, and I hope to change yours as well with this video. I hope to recontextualize, reevaluate, and shed light on this seemingly enigmatic topic of fairness with games. And even if you disagree with my arguments, I hope at minimum it will help you develop your own thinking on this topic. Without further delay, let's dive into the details. One of the strongest implications which seems derived by the word fair is to implicate the game and the game devs as the benevolent, or not so benevolent, holder of the weight of a scale. The player on one side of the scale and the game on the other, the game and dev choosing who gets favor or not. I will remove this idea as legitimate. The game devs cannot interact with you. They have a preemptive ability to curate the game in a way with expectations of what the player will do. They do not know for sure, nor do they interact with the player to inform any decision making for designing the game. Upon this basis, I will say it is a balance between the player and the game. With that established, the game itself has the choice of fairness towards the player and less favor towards itself, or it can choose unfairness towards the player and favor towards itself. The choice of the game is profiting the game or profiting the player, but what is being misaligned and causing the balance of fairness to sway? To go any deeper, you'd need to concede the word unfairness, in quotes, makes sense to use if there is a win state of some kind, the player values enough to try to attain. An example would be the princess at the end of Mario to be saved, or grinding to craft diamond armor in Minecraft, or grinding towards a diamond rank in Overwatch. In the case of Dark Souls, the win condition can be various criteria, but I'd gander it falls within collecting more powerful weapons, armor, or rings, finding new areas to explore, and defeating enemies by mastering the fighting mechanics and enemy movesets. Most people, when playing games, keep the end in mind as a goal too. What could the game use to push back against your goals, given everything I've laid out? Well, death, along with other methods, are used to set the player back when failing to pass the challenge. Death appears to be the main setback, although a few other factors, such as running out of limited items, or breaking a weapon, or killing an NPC, can be setbacks as well. If fairness comes about as a back and forth competition between the player and the game can set the player back to cause him to be unable to win. Now, using your imagination, come and play my version of Dark Souls. While you are playing my version of Dark Souls, I will describe two examples of different scenarios that will occur. Number 1, let us imagine you are walking up the path to meet the Black Knight in the Undead Parish at the top of the tower. As you climb the stairs, the floor disappears at random and you fall to your death. 2, you are fighting a giant skeleton in the Tomb of the Giants, and one more attack will kill the skeleton. Then his health becomes full, and he takes no more damage at all, and becomes unkillable. This is the first time you have seen both these hypotheticals happen while playing my version of Dark Souls. The first aspect I want to draw to your attention is the game didn't forewarn you the floor could disappear, or a giant skeleton can become unkillable. Perhaps forewarning is the pertinent ingredient for fairness then. If the game shows you a possibility will occur at the regular, and it's shown for the first time in a safe environment, at that point, is it fair? Isn't that akin to the basis of what the Asylum does after all? It shows you traps will be around with the small boulder. It shows you fleeing from battle is sometimes ideal in the first encounter with the Asylum demon. It shows you to expect bonfires at the regular, and it shows you always have the Estus Flask as a tool to use, assuming you use it and learn that. It also shows you how death works whenever you happen to die. Going forward, I will call these consistent aspects of the game rules. Some are negative, such as the boulder. It's a rule about how the game will push back against you with traps throughout the experience. The Estus would be a positive rule that helps you stay alive. So attaching the idea of rules to my version of Dark Souls, it would be unfair if the first time these occurrences of the floor disappearing and the giant skeleton becoming invincible were in circumstances where you lose significant progress. Maybe if in the Asylum there were areas where it taught you floors can disappear and enemies can become invincible, that would cause both the examples to be reasonable and fair. But in the case of the floor disappearing into instant death, it's unpreventable. What would forewarning disappearing floors do? You could know floors will sometimes disappear and kill you, but that doesn't mean it is preventable at all. You would lose progress by a trial and error mechanism of the game, or said otherwise, it would be a gamble every step you take. So let's imagine you're going to fight Ornstein and Smo and you summon Solaire to help. Oh, sorry. The floor to the right before entering their fog wall disappears and kills you. Time to consume another humanity. Maybe if it was the one floor in Undead Burg, it's not as much a rule and is more akin to a strange reality about the location. But I suppose it could be fair if it happens once, or maybe it is always unfair. It is hard to say in this situation. Perhaps established, consistent rules shape the game into a fair experience, because you can expect much more, and a lot less unexpected occurrences happen, which force you into a position where you're unable to respond and succeed towards your goal. Now applying this understanding to the game, maybe we can start to label certain scenarios as unfair. Maybe Capra Demon is unfair because it isn't a rule bosses will attack before you have time to respond. Or with the mandatory death with Seeth, it isn't a rule some bosses will kill you guaranteed. This seems reasonable. Therefore, two parts can be examined with this established rule concept. One is whether establishing rules as a concept makes a game better or more fair, and what is sufficient information for the rules, and or for any problem or solution in the game, it is more or less information fair. Let's start with the former topic. While establishing rules in a safe environment may seem romantic, as if the game is teaching a concept or fact to the player, and voila, now the game is fair, in actual application, treating rules this way could ruin the enjoyment. We can take a look at the Lord Vessel for an example. The Lord Vessel breaks a fundamental rule of the game. Before the Lord Vessel, the game has no warp. You have to journey from every single bonfire by foot. This is a hard rule for 50% of the experience, yet I think you'd be hard-pressed to discover a person who would call this bad or unfair. I could say it is another advantage to the player which balances out the size of the game map growing as you play. The game is balancing to account for the game map changing over time. But on the flip side, the game map getting larger is another consistent rule, if we want to keep going with that logic, and it should be expected. Therefore, you are getting an unfair advantage over the game, no matter which way you slice it. The game has set a rule that you can't warp between bonfires, and a rule that the map gets bigger, and it violates the prior for you. The same as I said at the beginning of this part, sometimes keeping rules consistent is not enjoyable. Receiving the Lord Vessel is an impactful moment, and removing it from the game would be disastrous for the overall experience. But it also would keep it more consistent. Thus, keeping rules consistent throughout the game may be fair, but it isn't always ideal for the Dark Souls experience. Even if the Lord Vessel is favoring the player and thus unfair, it would seem like a favorable design decision. So does fairness or unfairness even matter at this point? Perhaps you could argue breaking a rule is good if it benefits the player. Then if a rule is broken, it doesn't feel as if it is an unexpected tragedy. The Lord Vessel would certainly fall into this category. Well, another example I can think of that is similar to the Lord Vessel is the Painted World of Ariamis. In this example, you cannot warp out of the world area. You are forced to leave via the exit off the bridge. You cannot leave with Homeward Bone, and you cannot jump off the edge before resting. I tested it. So this takes the Lord Vessel we got in the new rule, which helps the player and removes it, causing an extra weight of tension to the area. I would suspect most players are struck by this moment in the game, and very few, if none, take issue with the game removing the warp ability. It appears to break the rule of warping added in the latter half of the game. This seems to be good or perhaps neutral. If you were to agree that both the Lord Vessel warping and being trapped in the Painted World are neutral or good, then this ruins the idea that consistent rules turn the game into a more enjoyable experience. But I still haven't answered the question whether they are fair or not. I think in order to answer if rules are fair, we need to migrate over to the second portion of the examination, which is about the foundation of rules. Maybe it is more about how clear or transparent information is in a general sense. Not within the rules, but rules included too. Let's do another hypothetical. Before you fight the Gaping Dragon, the NPC Domhall of Xena has the option to buy an item that is a piece of paper, where he had examined the Gaping Dragon and wrote down its behaviors. This piece of paper explains how much damage the dragon does to you per each attack, and all the behaviors of the attacks and how to avoid them. After this, when entering the fight, you attained almost all the information you need to know besides formulating your own offense. It would be very transparent and nothing unexpected could happen. This might be the most horrendous idea. You can see how this type of example could get out of hand to destroy the experience of Dark Souls. What if it began putting papers and NPCs before every encounter and giving full info dumps on the best strategy before entering the encounter for the area? This starts leaning into a children's game in some sense, where it won't leave the player alone to experiment and has the tendency to explain everything. You need a proper amount of new information, new experiences, and new encounters coming without the solutions or answers to the encounters always being obvious. Otherwise, this would remove a large chunk of the challenge for some people. But what is enough information to feel proper?
Getting to the crux of the issue, I will read a definition of the word fair.
If something is fair, it is reasonable and is what you expect or deserve. I speculate most people listening to this don't expect or feel they deserve to be shown the boss moveset before fighting it. Likewise, you may not expect it or feel it is reasonable to become trapped by Seeth when you die by the mandatory death. Then what are reasonable scenarios the game can let loose upon the player, and what is reasonable amounts of information to hand over to the player? Maybe Seeth's mandatory death is unfair because of the information. When I looked up reasonable, Google said it was having sound judgment or being fair and sensible. I'm already trying to discover what fair is, thus I will be using sound judgment as my bouncing board. Vocabulary.com says it is the capacity to assess situations or circumstances shrewdly and to draw sound conclusions. This means being reasonable is using reason to assess and conclude about our surroundings. Seems simple enough.
After you enter the Asylum Demon's fog wall, if you see you're above the Asylum Demon and you read the message before the fog, it is reasonable to conclude you can do a plunging attack while falling.
If you're walking and the floor disappears, having never done so before,
That's unreasonable to expect ahead of time. Therefore, the plunging attack is reasonable to execute given the information, and the disappearing floor is unreasonable to avoid given the information.
simple enough. Well, not so much. Believe it or not, if you agree with both those statements, that doesn't mean everyone agrees with number one. There are some people who don't think to use the plunging attack on the Asylum Demon.
They may not remember to use the plunging attack, and they might have missed the messages on the floor.
There is a lot of variance between us humans and our capabilities and observational skills. What is reasonable for someone to accomplish is not the same for others. Every person will have their own experience with the game. What I do during my first playthrough of the Asylum Demon fight is not going to be the same as everyone else's experience. Within everyone's individual experience are all kinds of variables as to why people play Dark Souls and how this changes their abilities. Some may be prodded into playing the game by a friend, and they don't enjoy it, or perhaps they aren't applying themselves as much. Or perhaps they're playing in an environment with lots of noise outside the game distracting them.
This is all possible for someone to experience when playing Dark Souls.
If you agree what is reasonable will be different for each person, then looking at information as a thing which can be measured until it is balanced and fair for everyone's experience is impossible.
To say again,
We can never know what the right amount of information is because it changes according to the individual player's needs at that point in time. Perhaps a player who couldn't figure out the plunging attack would be better off with the version of the game where it shows all boss attacks before fighting them. Perhaps for this person it would be more fair. Perhaps for another player, the developer messages in the Asylum at the beginning wouldn't be needed at all, as the player would hold the skills to experiment and learn without the game telling them. Now having the developer messages present for this person would be unfair to the game, oddly enough as it is. So it seems fairness in the context of reasonable amounts of information may be up to every individual's capacity. Although we can know what is unreasonable for people to know without information. For another absurd hypothetical, if in the corner of Firelink Shrine's pool of water there is an exact location, you could put your character and then input a series of button combinations that is 2,000 inputs long. This is a secret no one could figure out without information to suspect it was there. Then more information would be required to know the code, because that code is insanely long.
Therefore, there is a lower bound where not enough information is available for anyone to solve this kind of problem, even if they are very aware.
So, it will usually be advantageous for a game to give more information about how to solve problems like bosses and enemy encounters, which is worth noting.
So to conclude on consistency of rules and what is sufficient information, both of these will not be a one-size-fits-all, and neither seem to comment much on fairness. Some people will need more information or less information. Some people may want rules being broken for enjoyment, and some may dislike any inconsistency of mechanics, enemy reactions, level changes, etc., etc.
In other words, these are all up to each individual as far as where the sweet spot goes. There is a ridiculously low amount of information, like the complex code to input at the right spot in Firelink, which will be out of the scope of reasonable information for a player to discover. Likewise, if rules always change with little form of a consistent expectation the player could hold on to, that would be a problem too. But I think both of these taken to their extreme aren't even games, because games require some form of reasonable information to be able to solve and enough consistency where a player can expect to have some control over the game. If anything, I described two factors which are required to create a game, and the question hasn't been addressed whether Dark Souls is really fair. Capra Demon is often called unfair. I'll use him as a case study to examine how other factors can apply and what dimensions correlate or connect with fairness. After all, it seems information and consistency are not connected with fairness, at least as far as I can tell. I have picked 5 factors I often see brought up with Capra Demon being considered unfair. You may think of more, regardless, this will ground fairness in some concrete examples. Number 1, reaction time. For the first time experience, most can't react on time, the enemies are too close, and the player gets mauled too quickly. Number 2, too many attacks to escape. Even on repeat playthroughs, the enemies all descend at once, making unscathed attempts very hard. Number 3, true combo. The enemy's attacks can get you trapped and can true combo you. For those who don't know, true combo means an inescapable combo. It's true. Number 4, small area. The area is small, allowing little room for movement options, which frustrates the other factors mentioned here. The area smushes the camera, along with the tree which could cover the camera, causing extra use of babysitting the camera with the right stick. These combine, making visibility low and overall control difficult. Here, a lot can be examined about whether these parts of the fight are fair or not. Why is not being able to react on a first playthrough unfair? Well, given what I've said in previous sections, sometimes new experiences are fun, therefore the game throwing a player in the fray with little time to react should be new and interesting. All the enemies are a new challenge. You get to test your mettle against a small horde, and perhaps the game is reminding you need some HP and poise anyway. Thus, adaptability may be needed to best the encounter. And the combo is a matter of mechanics. Of course, enemies can always do a true combo depending on the circumstances. To get technical, it is normal, but not common. Being cramped and trapped can be exciting. The camera covering the view is a horrific moment, striking fear into the hearts of players. You see, each of these explanations I gave can be true. The first experience can be interesting or annoying. The group of enemies can indeed be a new challenge or a nuisance. Being cramped and trapped can be a fun, visceral adrenaline rush, or a sure, frustrating sign of death and loss of progression out of your control. The camera can be exciting and horrific, or cause you to feel robbed upon death. A true combo can feel normal and expected, but probably by no one. All these are experiences and feelings one could have upon reacting to the Capra Demon fight. None encapsulate fairness or unfairness. The personal feeling of what is and isn't fair doesn't prove the game's merit as fair. After all, a song in a Dance Dance Revolution machine can capture the feelings of quick reactions and being thrown in the fray, and I doubt a lot of people are saying Dance Dance machines are unfair in their gameplay. Fighting off hordes of enemies in a COD Zombies match can be an enjoyable fight of which you can be ganged up on, causing an inescapable death. Being cramped in the hallways of a Resident Evil game, along with the camera forcing specific camera angles, making navigation awkward, can be a good, challenging horror experience. In Tekken, it can be fair and reasonable to be comboed to half-life, to wake up, and get killed in the next hit if you react wrong. All these examples can contain very similar aspects or scenarios to what the Capra Demon fight has, but in different types of games. After laying out these contrasting games, the camera, the combo potential, the small area, the many enemies, all these listed aren't all unfair. They don't hold some magic innate quality making them unfair. It seems the application of these different parts of the fight and the context of the whole game are what matters most in the Capra example. After all, many people love COD Zombies and you can't win, yet Capra Demon is winnable and people consider it unfair and a bad design. Context is therefore a major factor when trying to determine quality. But again, does this have anything to do with fairness? Now, with the scope of different games in mind, look back at the disappearing floor example from earlier in the video. Is there a kind of game where the floor example would be okay? Super Meat Boy, I Am the Guy, Celeste. In those games, respawns are quick, and a mechanic like a floor disappearing wouldn't impact progress much. When thinking about the floor disappearing in this context, you can derive that there are no specific mechanical designs by which games must abide by. An HP bar is not needed, a tutorial is not needed, lights on a screen are not needed. You could create a game with gameplay based on sounds and it could be well designed. The Veil, Shadow of the Crown, seems well received by using this exact concept. So when people judge a single player game and call a part unfair, this is a blanket statement saying nothing at all because however the game was designed for that encounter is permissible even if you get some form of a fail state from it. One could say it didn't feel fair. That would be better as it speaks to the feelings you experience as a player, but stating as a fact Dark Souls is fair or unfair is absurd. This begs the question, should Dark Souls have disappearing floors in it? Well, maybe. Perhaps implemented well by the developers, which would take a lot of experimentation. And that is one of the key terms to use here. Is it well implemented? It is a sliding value of quality of the experience, playing the game, which I would call well designed, or said another way, designed with a lot of thought and care, synergizing well, and adding value to the overall experience. Even then, a well-designed game doesn't need to be liked by you. After all, we have different tastes and some games are not quote-unquote for us. If I were to not like the taste of apples, does that mean apples are not tasty? It seems apples fall into a space where they are edible, but not a taste desired by all. The tastiness of an apple comes from the person experiencing the apple bite. Coming full circle, is Capra Demon fair? Wrong question. Is Capra Demon well designed? That's the better question. Not on a first encounter, but is he even designed to be beaten the first time you encounter him? Is any Souls boss designed to be beaten after a single try? Illusory Wall is a fantastic YouTuber who goes through a lot of different strategies available for the fight. It isn't as single-dimensioned as it may seem. Perhaps the fight is a bit haphazard in its design, but I think overall it does fall in line with the experience of Dark Souls. When the word fair is used, I think the phrase is more akin to, that doesn't feel reasonable for the average player to be able to deal with, or that doesn't feel reasonable for me to be able to deal with. What feels reasonable can be a useful metric for a game as a product if you get a large quantity of opinions. But on the flip side, games can become successful by doing the opposite of what feels reasonable to most people. If you have never heard of the game Getting Over It with Bennett Foddy, that is a masterclass of a game being made for the frustrating experience. The game does little to feel reasonable for the player to be able to get through without immense trial and error, and the narrator even talks about it as you go through. Jump King is another similar style of experience. While some games work hard to produce feelings of fun and enjoyment, others, as listed before, can work to create frustration. It can be a misconception that if a game is producing the feeling of frustration, it is doing something wrong. This is false, and games can work to produce a plethora of feelings. It is worth considering that frustration and fun are divorced from poor or well designed. Getting Over It, I would say, succeeds in producing the feelings of frustration, although I don't have the time to substantiate that claim. Maybe another day. If the game's goal was to create that type of feeling and experience, and it succeeded, then it was well designed. As a side note, just because a game got the feelings from you it intended to, that doesn't mean it is a quality game. Britannica Dictionary definition of fair: agreeing with what is thought to be right or acceptable. If someone were to think Dark Souls is unfair because other games allow a quick save or a difficulty option, that would be true, perhaps, by a measurement of the opinions and feelings that come from common consensus. Or put another way, if 99% of the population thinks carrots are gross, that doesn't result in carrots being gross by a measurement of the carrots. The carrots don't have the measurement of gross. Instead, it means the collective opinions of 99% of the population thinks they are gross. There is still no measurable quality of grossness within the carrots. The measure of grossness is within the people's opinions. In the same fashion, Dark Souls would never become unfair because the general feelings of unfairness do not mean there is an innate quality of unfairness in Dark Souls. And regardless of any common opinion, there will always be outliers who don't lean towards the common opinion's preferences. Developers are not required by obligation to create their game for any particular group of people. Demon Souls, Dark Souls' predecessor and close cousin, became a hit because it strayed so far from the accepted design decisions surrounding difficulty around the time. It had a punishing and brutal nature with world tendencies, human in soul form, and no checkpoints. Most games around that time didn't contain stationary checkpoints at all that were shown to the player, similar to the Archstones. That design decision by FromSoft could perhaps be unfair by common consensus around the time, but using this argument of common consensus against the Capra Demon doesn't dictate whether it is fair. Also, all the same as one person's feelings also don't determine if it is fair. The Capra Demon fight would need to be examined to determine if it was good, or well designed, or a quality encounter. Arguments are a huge piece of this discovery process of quality as well, and that is how we can discover if any aspect or mechanic of a game is more well designed or not. Regardless, one person's opinion on whether it feels like a quality product, a large number of people's opinions on whether it's a quality project, result in no difference on whether it is a quality product. It is still a bunch of opinions with no argumentation backed up by clear observation of the game. Presumably. I mean, I'm assuming that if you have a well-backed up opinion, that's good. In the case of Dark Souls, again, We would need to observe the qualities of areas such as Capra, Seeth's mandatory death, or anything else for that matter. At this point, I hope you can tell that unfair is hiding the meaning of bad quality or feels bad. I think starting to question the game's quality would give more beneficial results, but it is also difficult because it requires careful observation of Dark Souls as a game. When fairness is talked about, it can be used in another sense of the word. Fair is much easier to measure when we take into account a multiplayer game. For example, I want to examine American football. If you look at American football, both teams possess equal access to the same tools, abilities, or penalties. It is up to a coin toss at the beginning to see who gets the ball to start, and from there it's up to each team's skill to win. This is overall about as fair as you can get, making equal tools for each party participating towards the goal of winning. The exception would be the coin toss, and perhaps it could be debated whether the team who gets the ball first is at an unfair advantage. Chess also has a similar problem with the debate whether white or black is at an advantage, because white always makes the first move. Regardless, a good explanation of fairness in games is this video I found talking about fairness as both parties having equal statistical odds of winning. That is the technical definition of a fair game. Equal chances of winning. With that in mind, either team has an equal chance to win the coin toss in American football. I think we can look at equal chances of winning in regards to tool sets as well. If both parties have access to the same tools or capabilities, then they have the same odds of winning, and that is fair. In any multiplayer video game, if both parties have access to the highest damage, fastest speed weapon, the difference is time in the game and skill as the tools are equal. Both metrics of time and skill do not apply to a game as an opponent, like the game is the other person you're fighting, unless it has some robust learning algorithm, and at that point we would have more existential questions on our hands if AI becomes that skillful. That point aside, taking all the setup information, if we measure Dark Souls as a 1v1 between the player and the game, it falls apart as a fair dynamic, even if it might seem okay at a passing glance. The game allows infinite retries for you, and no bosses and even some enemies get permanently removed upon defeat. The bosses and enemies are AI, constructed by aggro distances for following and then random attack patterns when in range. You have skill and time on your side, but those do not apply to such crude AI. Most enemies can't heal, none can upgrade themselves, change equipment, or level up. Those are all tool availability issues for the AI. The AI does not have the same access to the most powerful tools as you. Thus, the AI doesn't have the same chance of winning in the toolset department. I hope this displays the game and the player do not have an equal chance of winning. The biggest differentiator is the human mind and our ability to use the tools given to us to adapt to whatever the game throws our way. AI can't compete. Or if it does, it just completely destroys us. There's really no in between. AI can't compete, or at least it can't compete in a way that mimics the way humans do. It is also clearly designed for you to beat the AI, and the AI doesn't have a clear win condition either. In final, this section should demonstrate that in a pure competitive sense, the player and the game are not in a very comparable state to be competing. So fairness does not apply as something to be measured. When someone says Dark Souls is hard but fair, I would gander they are speaking to the single-player experience. Regardless, I do want to look at the multiplayer to be thorough as it is a part of the game. Sometimes people have a mentality that the single-player and multiplayer experiences of Dark Souls can be separated, but they are some of the most intertwined single-player and multiplayer out there. So I do treat multiplayer as a part of the experience. If multiplayer is a part of the experience, then I can say that every player has the same ability to wield all the tools available in the game. If you think someone may get invaded before gaining access to these tools, they could choose to play offline. thus allowing them to get nearly everything before playing PvP. Unless someone is cheating, which is unfair given the toolset definition I have used so far, the multiplayer could be considered fair in a pure competitive sense, but this is assuming the players have an agreement to duel. Darkwraith invasions, graveyarding, the Forest Hunters, and the Blade of the Dark Moon have enough variables to be unfair in many regards, adding a large splash of randomness to the PvP encounters due to how random invasions of different kinds are. There are no forced rules in the game for these type of PvP encounters, thus they can become unfair for either party, the host, or the invader. Shifting over to look at the arena in the DLC, that would be fair. Although some people don't optimize builds, of course, they still do have access to more efficient builds. It is fair because they could have a better build, but they may lack the time and knowledge to know how to build their character. Calling upon what I have defined before, if both parties have access to the same tools or capabilities, then they have the same odds of winning, and that is fair. One aspect some may see as unfair is access to an item such as the Dark Moon buff, which requires ears to get, but almost all the Covenant items can be farmed. I think the Ring of Fog may be the one exception, making it technically an unfair advantage. Taking all of these PvP aspects, I would say the game can be fair, but overall isn't designed in a way to be fair, at least as far as the PvP goes. So is Dark Souls PvP fair? Sometimes. It depends on how you're engaging with your opponent. What about difficulty curves? Some people, along with articles online, say games need difficulty curves, and having one causes a game to be well designed and fair. Thinking about a game such as the original Super Mario, it may be sensible to have the difficulties start out soft by having less pits and less enemies, but as the game progresses, there would be more of those along with extra challenges in the game to push the player further in their abilities. This assumes every game is about skill development though, and I would say this philosophy is good for many game experiences. Putting it in Dark Souls, I think it would be negative. The game is built around freedom of wandering around various areas, maybe out of order. There is no order to the game at the start, assuming you have the master key. Areas tend to offer different types of challenges, such as the Blighttown Swamp, Anor Londo Archers, New Londo Ghosts, the Darkness in the Tomb of the Giants, and the branches in the Great Hollow. You can see how these parts I listed don't have a difficulty curve building from one to the other. Any of the challenges could be slotted into any area of the game. For instance, Blighttown could have the ghosts instead of a poison swamp and poison enemies, and it wouldn't necessarily change anything about the difficulty per se, instead turning it into a different type of an area. As it stands, areas do have difficulties, but it can be challenging to measure anything about their difficulty except health and damage of enemies. Even then, players' builds will be different on various playthroughs, and this, likewise, impacts the difficulty from area to area. The Rafters in Anor Londo will be easier for those with range. Blighttown will be easier for those with poison healing and range. The Anor Londo Archers will be easier for those with range. Spellcasters are definitely easier. And the Ghost and New Londo are easier for those with cursed weapons. All these areas seem to demonstrate the game is built around exploration and new types of challenges, not challenges with increasing curves of complexity and precision with combat. There does seem to be a sort of general stat percentage increase across the game as it goes on, but I feel the game is honestly well designed to handle Soul Level 1 playthrough. Overall, I do feel the stats are not a massive leap. Maybe just a hop. Having sparse difficulty in some areas of the game for a more relaxed or different atmosphere, and then some difficult areas also impacts the areas themselves and their tone. If an area has high damage enemies, that could cause you to fear it. An example could be the giant mushrooms, as they have high damage output. This gives those enemies quite a bit of character, but they can be found in the earlier third or so of the game. Likewise, the bone wheel skeletons at the bottom of the catacombs are notorious for grouping up and shredding the player. That pit is a slice of the level which could strike fear into players. The giant skeleton dogs can have a scary element due to their aggression, at least from what I have heard from other players. On the other end of the spectrum, you have areas akin to the forest leading up to the butterfly, which has the bush dudes, who have relatively low damage. I doubt anyone thinks too hard when fighting through the area after first exposure to the enemies. It has a more tricky aspect to the fight, I'd say, with the ambushes, although trickiness itself can have its own difficulty to it. Lost Izalith with the goober yellow aliens and the little demon statues is another area with weaker enemies. Perhaps that isn't a great area to refer to, though, due to its unfinished state. In the interior chambers of Anor Londo, the Silver Knight enemies are copy-pasted a lot, so they may be average difficulty, but the exposure to such a large amount seems to affect players. To me, it almost seems like a training against them, making players become very proficient at killing the knights by the time they are finished exploring the area. In that sense, there is a lack of variety of enemies, but the area focuses on their particular layouts in the area. I feel it gives the area a sense of honing the skill of fighting those Silver Knights. Given all these differences with these locations that I've listed out, I feel Dark Souls doesn't have a strict curve of any kind for how enemies are designed from area to area. It is, again, more about variety. Each area proposes a new type of experience with enemy designs and level designs. It would be hard-pressed to call this bad design or unfair. It is different from a game akin to a platformer that can leverage a difficulty curve for its benefit. Now looking at games in general, though, what if you want your game to begin as a puzzle game and then drift into a story game about moral decisions? I'm not thinking of a specific game, but someone should have the freedom to pursue this game idea, yeah? Well, that would not have a difficulty curve, as the challenge would change or disappear. This seems to show that difficulty curves are not mandatory. You can create a gaming experience however you want to. Fairness could become an irrelevant measurement even if we could measure it via a difficulty curve, depending on the desired effect from a game. Given all this information I've laid out, I think a difficulty curve is a useful tool or metric that can be leveraged for some games to great effect, but doesn't necessarily have anything to do with fairness. Masahira Sakirai put a video on his channel about how the majority of those working on a game shouldn't make the decisions. He is the creator of Kirby and Super Smash Bros. He says the issue with the majority rule is the game will have less essence, which I feel is akin to identity. Likewise, he states that majority rule will create the safest decisions. I feel I can take this idea and apply it to fairness. When taking this game dev's opinion and experience into consideration, I don't think it is hard to imagine that games become safer when given to the majority. We can look at something like Minecraft, which has had community-voted mob updates since about 2017. The game doesn't seem to be breaking any ground in the gaming world. It is a safe product meant to appeal to the majority, and I think that is a clear philosophy given the split in the community over time from the old version to the new version, along with the voting updates. I'm glad Minecraft is around, but it can be quite frustrating when people start bringing the majority vote philosophy to other games that started with a vision coming from a singular director. In this instance, it would be Notch for Minecraft. I feel games can use both of these philosophies and adopt them as they suit the game. One can give more identity and distinction to the game, while the other can give a more level experience for everyone. I think the word fairness should be kept out of the discussion of a game's quality. If an individual doesn't enjoy a game and they say it is unfair, I think this is trying to leverage some kind of measurable quality that they can point to indict the game as a poor product. Ironically, this feels unfair towards the game, oddly enough. It feels to me like this mentality has sunk into gaming culture and people haphazardly use the word unfair as a way to malign a game for making them feel bad.
By the lords, you damn fool.
I think to properly criticize a game, you need to pay attention to the expectations put on you by the game's box art, description, starting levels, and prior moments which all mold an experience. Understanding the game's scope and unspoken expectations seems like a step in the direction of understanding the quality of a game because the context of the game needs to be understood. An example would be a game that looks like Dark Souls but plays like a turn-based strategy game. If you criticize it by the standards of an action RPG, like it having poor level up system and no main character, that is a poor criticism. Why? Because the context of the genre is removed. Once all the parts of any given game are understood, which adds up to a genre, then you can proceed by asking if that game met the goal of its given context or expectations from that genre, as turn-based strategy games usually don't have level up stats like strength or dexterity. Sometimes that goal isn't something that fits into a genre though. If you apply this to Dark Souls, a lot of what I have done in this video is broken down how to contextualize moments in the game. From there, asking whether the moments are fair or unfair is irrelevant because it doesn't apply. The better question is, does this enhance the desired experience? I feel this video could be taken as me trying to block criticisms of Dark Souls, but I have plenty of criticisms of the game. The game is good but very, very flawed, with many odd bugs, bizarre hitboxes, and some poorly designed areas. I'll link a video below if you want to see some of those hitboxes, by the way. I think my conclusion and encouragement with this video is for people to use more precise and clear language when discussing and criticizing games. In prep for this video, I have read dozens of articles which state some random element they don't like in a game as fair or unfair. It is quite depressing to see such lazy thinking going into criticizing games.
Anyway, when you start sexy hiking, you're standing next to this dead tree that blocks the way to the entire rest of the game. It might take you an hour to get over that tree, and a lot of people never got past it. You prod and you poke.
This isn't a slight against anyone in particular. I have in all likelihood used poor language myself in the past to criticize games, and I am not immune from doing that now. But I would like to help bring criticism space into a elevated place where we can be more clear about our bias and be more precise about what qualities can be measured about a video game. I've had this topic in my mind for some time, and I think Dark Souls is the perfect candidate to explore the validity of fairness. To finally answer the question, is Dark Souls fair? From everything I have laid out, I think I will leave you to answer that one.